This is great. Hey, Rob, do you want to do prayer real quick before?
Well, let's pray as we jump in. So, Lord Jesus, thank you so much for the opportunity to learn about how to save lives, how to alleviate pain, how to be a part of your solution in the midst of a broken world. Thank you for Josh is willing to lead us today. Pray that we have attentive hearts and lives. And we thank you for Josh's birthday. It's in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Like you said, my name is Josh Keller. I've been a member of this church for a while. Some would say I should have been at Sundays a lot more than I have been, but I've been trying to make it a habit to do that now. I'm glad that you all came today for this basic first aid course. By me teaching this to you is nothing, I'm not going to be able to certify you because of that. If that's something you're interested in or your agencies are interested in, I could do that at a later date. But this is just basic first aid, and what I want everybody to get from this is mainly just to use what you got. I mean, I'm going to show you different things up here and show you different levels of aid bags and things like that. But what I want people to take away from this is that we need to use what you have. And I want you to be able to look around and be able to, oh, I could use that cushion for this, or I could use that piece of cloth for that. And so a little bit about myself. I served 8 years as a combat medic, and I served in a line unit. And that means that you went to combat. And I was mainly attached to infantry and recon platoons. So I'll tell you a little story. Is that when I got in, I was all excited. I was gung-ho, and I never, I graduated Fort Sam, and I was ready. I was a medic. I was ready to go. I came home on leave, and I was at a party at Ball State, and of course everybody, oh, you were a medic, and all these women are talking to me and stuff, and I'm a young guy, and I'm thinking, yes, right? Well, we're at this party, and this guy, his name was Kirby, I'll never forget his name, proceeded to stand up on this railing on this third floor and said, I don't know if he's going to say I'm the king of the world or what, but he fell instantly, hit the ground. And everybody looked at me instantly. And I was like, I just graduated, but I didn't say that. I didn't say, I just graduated. I don't know what I'm doing. I was never written real. Everybody's been fake or mannequin, right? But anyway, I proceed and I run over there and I check the guy out, and he's good. I hold him in C-spine precautions, check his pulse, check his pupils, did all this stuff that I was trained to do. And I mean, I never thought I'd be able to do it, and I did it all. And then ambulance came, I gave them a report, and they were like, wow, that was real good, it's good. So the guy ended up breaking his neck a little bit, so it's good what I did. So what that story is supposed to be is that you're going to be thrown into stuff, and you're going to be like, I have no idea what I'm doing. But you're there, and you're going to be helping, and that's all that matters. Usually I find people are comfortable or are comforted by somebody just being there, mainly. Okay, I also went to the Indiana Law Enforcement Academy. I was pre-trauma hospital life support instructor for the Army. I did a lot of stuff with trauma. I was also a firefighter in the county, and I worked for Blackford EMS and Grant County EMS, and I taught driving and CPR and did all kinds of stuff for them. So the main thing I want, like I said, I want everybody to take away from this is how to recognize when somebody is hurt, how to use the things that you have available to you. So I brought in some sticks and some clothing and some other things here just for that purpose. This next slide is about safety first. You have to be safe. It is the most important thing that everybody is safe, that you understand that the scene is safe. Because you're not going to be able to help anybody if you run up on somebody, they're being electrocuted, you step in a pool of water, as you were coming to them, you're down. So make sure that the scene is safe and that you're able to render aid when the scene is safe. That was stressed to me a lot in medic school, is that you're the only guy. You're going to be the only guy or the only medic there, and so you're going to have to take care of yourself first. And when I remember hearing that, I thought, man, that's selfish. That's real selfish. But I understand it now. I completely understand it now. I put this in as one of the first slides. It's a Good Samaritan law. It lets you know that Indiana has a Good Samaritan law, and that you will not be prosecuted or sued, I should say, if you're there rendering aid in good faith. And you hurt somebody doing it, as long as you're not doing something stupid, and you're doing it in good faith, and you were there just to help them, you will not, there's that law to protect everybody from doing that. So, anybody have any questions about the Good Samaritan law or anything? Yes, ma'am.
What states do not have that?
I think they all have them, but I will get the mic. Okay, can you repeat the question for me?
Are there any states that do not have the Good Samaritan law?
There is some states that, I think every state has a Good Samaritan law, from what I found out online. But some of them vary. So Indiana's is very good. It's one of the things Indiana does do well, is that Good Samaritan law. I know in some states it's kind of limited in what they do, but here, as long as you're doing something in good faith, and that's the thing, if you're doing something in good faith, rendering aid, then that you'll be covered under that Good Samaritan law. So, like I said earlier, protecting yourself and is the most important thing. So wear gloves if you can. And I say that if you can. There's been situations I've been put in where I didn't have time to put on gloves. But those are rare. So usually what I would do, I'd always carry gloves, and I still carry them in my personal vehicle, just so I can have them. And usually I put them on, it just comes natural now. I put them on as I'm walking up to somebody. Say there was a wreck, there was a wreck last summer right by where I live, and the guy got hit on a motorcycle, and I didn't have gloves then, but it ended up being one of those times that I saw it and I needed to act quickly. So when I got out, I just checked the guy and made sure he was okay and things like that. But the main thing I said is protecting yourself first, using gloves and barrier devices. And barrier devices, if you guys have taken CPR, those masks that they tell you to use those. And don't be afraid to use those. I think a lot of people are afraid, well, I only got one. Well, most places and most EMSs, and I know Grant County EMS, usually, and I can't say it for every time, but usually that valve that's in here, if I can pop this open, these are usually what they look like, and this pops out. It pops up as you're doing this. So this valve can be taken out and be replaced, and usually what Grant County EMS has always done for me, and I've used them in the past, is they'll tell you how to clean this very well with bleach and water, and then they'll give you a link to where you can get one of these for free or at little cost. So it's much cheaper just to buy this part, and this is the most important part if you do not want puke in your mouth. So you need to remember that. This is an awful thing to have somebody come at you with their breakfast. So, but like I said, don't worry about those things. And also the AEDs. I know a lot of people are worried that those pads, they cost a lot of money, and they do. They're $80 to $100 a piece depending on what you use in the brand. But if you take those pads, usually you leave them on the patient all the time. You leave them on the patient as they go. So EMS will either hand you one if you remember. So try to always remember, hey, I used my pads. Do you have one? They'll usually throw you one, give you one, or try to get back with another set. So that way, and I know that very good in this county, and I've never had an experience where I said, hey man, I used my pads, and the guy said, good luck, and walked on. They usually just throw you a pair, just tell you who to get a hold of. Also, when I worked for Ball and Blackford EMS, that was kind of the same thing. It was the same rule of thumb there. So, the AD pad, where you put one here on the chest and one here, you always leave them on, so that way because you don't want to give them your AD. That's very expensive, and I don't know where that's going to end up. So, but if you just switch out that pad with them, just unplug it, leave it on there. Say I used one, they'll usually give you one back. All right, the first thing about first aid is ABCs. I mean, it's essential for everything, and it always starts out this way. So, and that's airway, breathing, and circulation. Because you can't really, if you don't have those things, you really can't do first aid. If the person's not breathing or doesn't have an airway, you need to go to another step. You need to completely forget about whatever's happening right there. So have most of you taken CPR here? Okay. It looks like a lot of you have. So make sure the person has a pertinent airway and they're able to breathe. And usually what I always do is how I always check is you talk to somebody, hey, are you doing okay? And if they say yes, and say yes, not just nod their head, yes, that means A, they have an airway and they're breathing. Next thing you need to do is introduce yourself. You know, I'm Josh, I'm here, I've been trained. Try to tell the person what you've been trained in, okay? I don't care, but try to make yourself sound real good, right? I mean, you don't have to say, well, you know, I'm a traumatics, specialist from, whatever, but just try to give them a little bit of your background. So that's going to take some practice in a lot of you. I know for me it did. I would always screw that up. I'd be like, hey, I'm Josh. What am I? So, you need to kind of practice it so that you got it down pat. So when you come up to somebody, that builds confidence instantly. If somebody comes up to you, doesn't know their name or know what they're doing, you're going to be like, do I want this person even touching me? Why are you even talking to me, right? That's kind of what you're going to be thinking. But if you go up there with hey, I'm Josh, I'm here, I'm trained in first aid, I was a medic, can I help you? 90% of the time, people are going to say, yes, I need your help. So, and then at that point, you would assess their circulation and things like that. It's just a definition of trauma, and you'll be able to determine MOI or mechanism of injury. Sometimes if you go onto a scene or you walk into a place, I wouldn't say to a scene because this is a little bit different, but you go there and the person is unconscious. So you're like, you got to all of a sudden become a detective. What happened here? And you need to start making sure the scene's safe. That needs to be the first thing. And then seeing if there's anything around that can cause damage to them. And then move on to ABCs, things like that. All right, slip, trips, and falls. This is one of the most common things that you'll see. I know we're here for trauma and first aid and stuff like that, but these happen all the time. And it could be as simple as, it could be as serious as this guy, he's got his bag and his cell phone, everything's flying in the air. Or it could be just as simple as somebody walking and they didn't see, or I know sometimes I don't know if I drag my foot, but sometimes I trip over my own nothing. It's just something there that I tripped over, and hopefully I don't fall, but sometimes that happens. So slips, trips, and falls are considered, they're kind of categorized in two different things. So there's same level falls, that's a slip or a trip, or there's elevated. And it says here, in every research I did, that it would be fatal. It can more than likely be fatal. It's not necessary, but 20 feet for adults and 10 feet, or 2 to 3 times the height of a child. And all those that are at that level, 20 feet or 10 feet, need to be put in C-spine precautions. And what C-spine precautions is, it's just something that we call, C-spine stands for cervical spine. And so if a person falls, and you see them falling from an elevated position, say like a high ladder, somebody's here working and they fall, you need to instantly think neck or head trauma, because that is very serious. And they do not need to be moved at all unless there's like a fire or immediate danger, something's coming down on them or something like that. So you want to try to keep them in that position. If they had fallen, they landed on their face, you may need help, but holding their neck in line as you're turning them and keeping everything midlined or in line will help prevent any further injury from that person. We do, I brought a couple cases, or I'm sorry, a couple things of C-collars. You know, they usually come like this, and they're flat, and this thing's for the chin, if none of you've seen them. But I tell you, I've trained many people, and they still, to this day, the same people I train, put them on backwards every time. I don't get it. It's like this. What? Does that even look right? I mean, what, is that your breathing hole? Doesn't even look like it would work. So if you have one of these, or if you don't, try to get one. Try to get one that's a no neck, is the ones I prefer to get, because they fit a wide variety of people. No necks do. This one's a regular, so usually what you do is you hold your fingers here, and you'll be able to tell how thick this is, and that just takes too much time. I'd rather use a no neck. It works much better. So when you get this, pull it out, and if you want to help, pull this chin thing here. I mean, that's what it's made for. It's for your chin. And numerous times I see people put that on. I don't even know what they're doing with that. But try to familiarize yourself with a lot of these things. But like I said, get a no neck. They're the best. Next slide. All right, it's pretty graphic. When I gave this presentation to the 5th and 6th graders, they loved this slide. Some of them did. Some of them thought it was disgusting, and probably still talking about it to this day. But there's different kinds of fractures. Closed and open fractures, sprains and strains, different things that need to be splinted. An open fracture is bad. I mean, there's no ways around it, because it's not only a fracture, it becomes a wound at that point too. So it's more of a compound thing, and I think that's where that comes from. It becomes a compound fracture because now it's a wound, and it also needs to be splinted without causing more damage by putting that bone in a splint. So, and there's all kinds of issues after that the person needs to be on severe or very serious regimen of antibiotics to treat that. So, there's different kinds of, we talked about that, different kinds of fractures and things like that. And never reposition a fracture. I know it's going to look weird, and you know, there's somebody here I know who had a weird misshaped arm. He broke his arm, and it looked like an S, and he, you know, didn't understand that it was wiggling. But that's not supposed to look like that, but that's not your job to put it back in place. So try to remember that. You can cause a lot of damage by trying to move a bone back into place. I know a lot of people get their medical advice from movies and TV and Rambo, and that's not how you do things. It can cause a lot of damage. If someone, for example, was to fracture their femur, your femur is a huge bone, and they use a traction splint, EMS, or medics, use a traction splint to pull that bone apart when you break it. That's how you stabilize it, just to transport them. So, because there's so many muscles and tendons and things, that bone is carrying a lot of weight usually, so it usually ends up like that. And pulling that back apart, and if you're not planning on holding that until they get to surgery, I would just say just leave it. Just leave it as is, try to splint it in place, and make sure that it's not open. If it's open, then we start treating and control bleeding. Anybody have any questions? Okay. All right. So like I said before, my mostly that I want people to bring from this is that improvised splinting and splinting that will that you can use from anything. That you'll be able to walk around and be able to go into a restaurant maybe and be like, you know, if this happened, you know, this is over here, and I could probably use that for this. That's how I do things. Now the colonel, he does things different. He wants to find the exit, and he wants to see, you know, where's the closest. You know, if he has to kill somebody, how many people he has to kill on the way out. So, but and I think that way too. I always got to have my back. You know, I can't have my back towards the door, but that's something you're trained to think. But like he said, you're going to have to own the situation. This is your situation. You have to own this. EMS here in this county will get here, if you're lucky, in 20 minutes. If you're lucky, and that's, you know. that's just something that you're going to have to become familiar with is this splinting and taking care of people. So it says here, if you have the fancy splinting material, use it. Use it because it helps. It helps on down the line. It helps EMS when they receive the patient. Oh, he's already got this, and they can kind of see your level of competency, and they go, okay, we're just going to go ahead and leave that. But if you don't have that stuff, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it at all. I mean, you can break these chairs here and use these. I mean, don't do that, but we could use those as splinting material. You know, I just brought some sticks that I found in the alley the other day. You know, these are great splints. Just remember that when you splint, you know, I mean, this could literally cover my whole leg. I could, you know, if I broke a major bone in there, I could splint on both sides and I would be fine. You know, and what's great about sticks is they break and you don't have to worry about it, so. And it doesn't have to be pretty. I mean, that's the main thing. It doesn't have to be pretty as long as it's effective. Make sure that your splints are effective. And the same thing with bandages. If they're effective, that doesn't matter what they look like. You may be judged by the EMS people, but who cares? I mean, they're the professionals. They're going to talk crap about you and go, well, you see that splint? That was ridiculous, you know, and never take in consideration that you saved that person's life. All right, gunshot wounds. Gunshot wounds are something serious, and it's something that some people say, well, I'll just treat the holes. That's not always the case, because it's more what you don't see that's the issue. Because a gunshot wound can cause a fracture. It can cause a puncture wound. Inside it will cause burns. You know, it will cause a cavitation. A cavitation is, I know you've seen this, shoot that ballistic gel on TV, and where it waves out. That's what it does on the inside of your body. It starts out maybe at that size, but as the shock wave goes through your body, it's creating all kinds of damage as it goes. And hopefully there's an exit wound. And I say that, people are like, why? Well, because that way you can kind of tell the line of travel that the bullet went through. And you can also be able to identify organs in that situation. When I was a police officer, I was involved I was patrolling one night, I'll just tell you, and it was probably around midnight, 1 o'clock, and a call came in that shots fired, guy's down. It was just outside Fairmount. Go run in there. So I pull up, the guy's on 911. Here's something you don't want to do. 911, gun in his hand. And I pull up. I don't know who the shooter is. Police don't know that. So I, of course, draw my gun on him. You know, what are you doing? I'm talking to 911, you know. So I had to make sure the scene was safe before I go. A couple minutes later, Grant County Sheriff's Department show up, which was very good because usually they're pretty far out, but that night they weren't. So we go looking for this guy. We end up finding him in his house. He tried to break into his neighbor's house. He was on drugs and he was stealing things, and he got shot. And because of where he got shot, when I found him, he was yelling at me. And remember this, there's two kinds of consent. There's implied consent, which if somebody is unconscious or something like that, an implied consent means that if they were normal people and conscious and being able to talk to you, that they would want you to help them. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. But, so what I told him is that, you know, he was yelling at me that he didn't want my help, and I said, you're in shock. I'm going to, and I verbally told him, I'm going to use implied consent. And I stuck my fingers in both those holes. And because I did that, he's able to walk around today and talk to me, and I'd seen him a few years ago, and he remembered me. Because where he got shot is through the front here and exited out the back. And I told the guys I was with, I said, and they all knew I was a medic, so I said, that's his liver and his kidney. I said, he will die. If we do not plug those holes, he's going to bleed out. That's very large. And they were like, okay. So they landed a helicopter, and I held my fingers in those holes until he got on the helicopter. And you're going to have to do that maybe. You know, that's weird, you know. You sticking your fingers in bullet holes, that's not natural. But, you know, you may have to do that. in order to save somebody's life, because I always try to use it as an example, as like a car. You know, if you have a car and there's a bunch of, and you don't have enough oil in there, and it runs out, everything seizes up. The body's the same way. If you don't have volume of blood, and it all goes out, well, guess what? Now you're dead. So, and when I was a medic, when I first started, everybody got an IV. Everybody. You were sick, you got an IV. You were bleeding, you got an IV. As I progressed through my time as being a medic, and they started changing things, and different things started coming in, and not everybody needed an IV. And the thought behind that is, the body has its own clotting mechanisms, and it will defend itself. But if you introduce an IV or another solution in there, you're blowing out all that clotting stuff. So sometimes, you know, not everybody gets an IV. So, impaled objects. Impaled objects are awful. But I know a lot of people see this on TV and they're like, just pull it out, and then I'll be able to run faster and do things, and then I'll just cauterize it with my lighter. No, that doesn't work. So, an impaled object should be, if someone trips or falls, this is usually what happens, or they fall off something, an impaled object will get in, you know, say through their arm. Well, you need to wrap that into place. Don't ever pull it out, because it's already sealed itself on both sides. So just wrap it, stabilize it as you wrap it, but you want to wrap it in place so that, and let EMS know when they arrive what you saw, because they're not going to take that bandage off, but they're going to take maybe what you said. You know, where's it going? You know, because if you bandage it up good enough and stabilize it enough, it won't move, but they won't be able to tell what happened there. So there is some exceptions to that rule. That one exception is not really an exception of pulling it out, but if somebody has an impaled object in their eye, you need to leave it in their eye and bandage both eyes. And the reason why that is, the theory behind that is, because your eyes move together. And if you move this eye, your eye is going to go this way. Well, you got a stick in your eye. It's damaging the back of your head. And so you just need to cover both eyes. And that's going to freak somebody out. Really, it does. Because now they had something in their eye. Now they can't see at all. Just try to reassure them. And there is an exception, is if it's in the airway. You can see that child there, that they have a stick, but it goes to the left or right, I can't tell in this photo, but of their trachea, which is fine. But if it was straight midline in there, you would need to pull that out. That's the only exception to that, is if it's stopping their airway. If it's going through their nose, that is one airway that does not need to be, you can leave that in there. But if it's in their trachea, it needs to come out, and it needs to try to address it as best you can, and you know, maybe that will add a little bit more air to their lungs. So, all right, control bleeding. There's different kinds of things: abrasions, lacerations, avulsions, and punctures. Lacerations can be pretty bad. I don't know if some of you know how to treat abrasions. They're not. I fell, skid my arm up, but it needs to be tried to be dressed. It's not a life-threatening emergency, so using clean dressings on those are very important for healing. Don't put anything special on it. You don't need Neosporin right away. If it's not you, don't put things like Neosporin, other things like that, because the reason why, say a person falls and gets a bunch of gravel in there, they still have to go to the hospital, but it's not life-threatening. They have to go in there and debris that, so they have to take all that gravel out, and it's a process, but you adding extra things to it is not going to help. So just kind of treat it as is. All right, and this would be more for wounds. There's different kinds of wounds, obviously, or there's different kinds of lacerations or punctures or things like that. There's visceral, arterial. The arterial ones are the ones that spurt the bright red blood. The bright red blood needs to be controlled, because that's coming directly from your heart, and that's where you're going to bleed out the most and the quickest. if say I get cut here, you can see I have veins here. But, you know, they may not bleed, depends on the level of the cut or the depth of the cut. And, you know, applying direct pressure usually stops venous blood. It just, you know, same thing when you go to the doctor and you get your blood drawn, they say hold that, you know. Sometimes they tell you to hold it up over your head, but it usually stops. But unless you've seen somebody bleed with a bright blood, you'll never understand it. I always thought, well, that's neat. You know, going through as a medic, I thought, well, that's pretty neat. You know, seeing that until you see it, and then you're like, wow, that is crazy. Like, I can shoot the wall from here with that. So, so what you would do for something that is any of them. So either one of those wounds, you would apply direct pressure, and the direct pressure will stop the venous. And then the arterial one, you would want to check after 5 minutes, and if it's still bleeding pretty good, you're going to want to hold pressure again, wrap it, and try to bring it above your heart. That's the main thing, is try to get it stopped. So you're going to hold it over your head, or hold it up as high as you can. You know, sometimes with your leg, or if the person has, you know, try to lay them down. If they're bleeding, if they are bleeding so bad that they're starting to turn white, you need to lay them down or set them down, because they're going to go down whether they like it or not. So that's one way you can assess a circulation. So you want to apply a pressure dressing and elevate, like I said. You're going to keep pressure applied, and you're going to check pulses after you get the blood stopped. So say it's been 10 minutes, I apply direct pressure, and I'm holding it above my head. I look, everything seems okay. I want to make sure that I still have pulses and feeling distally. So the wounds here, you always want to check here. Same thing on your legs. You get here, you want to make sure everybody can feel down here and be able to wiggle their toes, you know, make sure everything's good. By doing that, you're assessing their circulation, and that's a positive thing. So also, if you ever wrap, so you got the wound here, and you've wrapped them up, you put the knot directly over the wound, then you want to check pulses again. That goes for everything. Anytime you put something on somebody that wraps, always check for pulses. Always make sure everybody has a pulse afterwards, and that their skin color is good. Everybody has capillary refill. So in your finger, all you do is push, and you'll see it turns red and then comes back white, or vice versa. You know, that way you can tell if they're perfusing properly, and you're good there. And I put on there, and I put it in red, only use a tourniquet as a last resort. Because, and I say that, first of all, nobody ever gets a tourniquet on the neck, okay? That does not happen, okay? Tourniquets are used on your appendages, you know, your arms, your legs. You don't need them for fingers. But things where you're going to be bleeding out, your legs, you don't have to go through this controlled bleeding steps if somebody loses an arm. If they lose it from here or lose a hand, you don't have to go, oh, let's hold pressure for 5 minutes. No, that's instant tourniquet. So on a tourniquet, it needs to be, if say a person loses gets this part severed and is gone, you want to go about 2 inches, or they say 2 to 3 inches above there, not on the joint, and you want to apply the tourniquet here. We have different forms of tourniquets. Let me see. Hey, Lael, did you have one up here? Okay. Oh, it is? Okay. Here's one of the IVAC tourniquets. They are very good. They're real easy to use, but I would always try to familiarize yourself with the things, okay? Try it on. Do not crank it down. That's real bad practice. But you know, put it on yourself even. These are actually made for you so you could treat yourself even if no one's around. So you know, put that down in there, crank it down. And, you know, like I said, just familiarize yourself with the tourniquets. There's different brands. There's different clotting factors that people use too. if you have those in your first aid kit, try to understand what those are. There's YouTube videos for everything. So, yes.
If you don't mind, I'll just interject there for a second.
Yeah.
On the iPad. That's the one I purchased several of and given out. You have the elastic band. I know her school uses it because that's what we purchased for the schools. This is just my opinion. If you're carrying a weapon with a concealed carry permit and you don't have one of those, you probably ought to readdress why you don't have that. And the other thing I'll say on that, you need to be prepared to put that on. It won't always stay Velcroed through that buckle. You need to be prepared by yourself to slide it back through the buckle. Because I don't know about you, but sometimes you pull it out real quick and it slips through the buckle. If you're going to carry a gun, you need to be prepared to get red. And that means you're going to get bloody. Because you're going to shoot somebody, and if you don't kill them, what are you going to do? You're going to start giving them first aid in that respect. That one I like, and to be quite honest, you check around on eBay or in some of the sites, you can pick them up for under $20 in some cases. You can also pay $40 for them. That's the one I prefer in that respect. I got mine from, it used to be in every emergency trauma kit that every soldier's issued on a battlefield. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're right. And that's also issued now to police officers in this state. And it's not always. Most departments, I would say, in this area are volunteer, so they can't. You know, a lot of their guys are volunteer, so their funds are real low. But I know there's been a lot of push for having officers have those with them. But back to what I was saying about a tourniquet. So understand this, that if you put on a tourniquet, everything below there, so say the limb is still intact, try to remember that. They've come a long way with regaining perfusion to areas, but just try to remember in your head that everything below that tourniquet is gone. It's pretty much a loss. So if you remember that, how I always looked at it is I would like to save most of your arm, you know, or if that's happened in the past where somebody's got their femoral artery cut really bad, you know, depending on where that is and stopping that bleeding, sometimes you cannot put on a tourniquet, but if you do, I always try to save as much of the limb as I possibly could. That's very important because you got to try to think later on down the road, you know, things are going to be tough for them. You don't want to make it worse. But, you know, I guess that's why we've got the Good Samaritan law, I guess. So, anyway, this is just a little quick thing about controlling bleeding. You know, they make the quick clot stuff. They make pixie dust. We called it Asmetics, where you put it on there and it just clots the stuff right up. It's awful to get it out of a wound. So when the surgeons hate you for it, but you know, you saved that person's life. But this stuff gets coated in everything, and it needs hours and hours of spraying that stuff out, and it becomes awful. But that is an option, and sometimes it's very effective. Here's a video real quick. This is an improvised tourniquet, and I like this video because it shows this child and stuff that you normally carry. I know I always carry a carabiner on my keychain, and we can practice this when this portion's over. But it's carabiner, and all you need is a keychain, and it's real simple. So if you guys would like to watch this real quick. Oh, wait. How do I? Will you click on the video for me? Awesome. I forgot about this part. We didn't check this. If you click on the video itself, you are? Oh, awesome. Not working? What'd you say? Right click on it and hit play. Is that one of the things? I can't see. Okay. It played at the school. Okay. Well, what they do is practically, it's real simple. The guy uses a tie and he uses a carabiner. And does anybody have a set of keys on them? I can just borrow real quick for an example. Okay. Perfect. And you don't even have to take the keys off. So, would you like to do what? No, I want to use Kobe's arm. Kobe, come on up here. So all you got to do, it's real simple. You feed it through here. Just get a piece of cloth. This cloth will work. It's just a shirt I cut up. It's no big deal. Why don't you have a seat here on the second step for me? So all you do is you keep this like this. Let me set this down. And say they're going to be bleeding, so it's not going to be as calm. He might be screaming or might be passed out at that point. So all you're going to do is put the key here. It doesn't matter where it is. Just make sure you thread that through. Then you tie a knot. Just one simple knot. That's all you have to do. To hold it in place. I mean, that's all. That's literally all this is doing. Then you tie a second knot. And they're just simple square knots. But you don't completely tie that one yet. You pull your carabiner through that. And then you really crank down on that. So then you got this, you can turn this right here with your hand, and you can get a lot of mechanical advantage from that. I mean, it's real. Can you guys see that? I mean, this is great because you got literally your whole fist, and you can crank that thing down. Is it getting tight? Okay, so I don't want to get it too tight. So then when you get it cranked down, you want to make sure there's no more blood coming out. You may have some oozing, that's normal, but make sure that you have no more spurting blood. And then you want to make sure that there's no pulse. That's important, no pulse. But you can see here I'm above the elbow because, say the cut was here, I can't, 2 inches is right in the crease here of his elbow. So I put it 2 inches above that joint. So then you take this, and the reason why the keychain is there is now you can slide that through, and it will not come undone. It's real simple. But here's the next most important part, is you have to write down the time. I don't care if you take their blood and write it on their face like we used to do as medics, or you take their blood and write it on their pants. It's very crucial that you put the time. It's the only thing you have to remember with that is crank it down, there's no pulse, and put the time. All right. Correct. The time's for EMS and doctors, mainly when they get to the ER, so they know how long it's been. Thank you, sir. Yes.
Less than 2 hours, they might be able to save.
Right. Right. They've come a long way, and I was reading all kinds of things about perfusion and things like that. So that, most of the things we talk about in EMS and stuff is the golden hour. You want to try to get somebody, but that doesn't mean they have to be in surgery by an hour, because everything that you do, or everything that you do to help them increases that hour. So just remember that. Everything that you do to render aid, I should say. If you're punching them in the face, I don't think that's going to help with the hour. But and the next thing is shock. Now a person's going to go in shock when they start losing blood volume. That's not always the case. I mean, you could have bee stings. That's a form of shock. You could have somebody get real excited and pass out. That's actually a form of shock. That's just part of it. And sometimes if say, like in this instance, this lady's up here in a trauma blanket with her feet elevated, that's serious shock. So I don't know what happened to her. I didn't get the backstory on this, but you see how her feet are elevated. Shock, what it does is your body's trying to take care of itself. So remember we talked about that lizard brain and stuff. It provides, your body does is kind of the same thing. It provides blood and everything to your vital organs so that you will survive. But that being said, your body, your external, that's outside your core, is going to get really cold, and in some cases, could get frostbite, or could help them deteriorate faster because they're getting cold. So you always want to try to wrap them up, keep their head. The main thing is a lot of people forget in shock is that your head loses a lot of heat. It's the number one thing, especially if you have no hair like myself. you lose a lot of heat. So try to keep something underneath them or cover their head. Don't cover their eyes or their mouth, but just cover their head so that not a lot of heat's coming out that way. And use one of these blankets. These Mylar blankets are great. They're, real cheap. But if you have other blankets, go to the Army surplus, Navy surplus, whatever, and get some of those wool blankets. Those are great things too. Plus they wash and they can be used for anything. You can fold them over and use them as a litter, carry them. They're very strong. So whatever your preference is, make sure you elevate the feet. Do not lift their head up, but lift their feet up. So you want to get their feet above their heart. And it's just basic. And just wait on EMS. Now, if they're in a shock position and you're laying like that, and you have to lead them for any reason, you need to roll them on their side. Most people say prefer their left side. And how you do it is, Kobe, why don't you come on up here again? Okay, I just want you to lay straight down here. Can you see this, Leo? I will put him on the stage. Come here, Kobe. Come on. So lay down. Just on your back. Okay. So what you're going to do is he's unconscious, and you're going to make sure that he's unconscious, and you're going to say, hey, I got to leave. Just try to talk to them, even if you're not. Even if you don't think they're aware of things, they could possibly be aware. So all you have to do is take their leg and throw it over this leg and throw it over like this. Don't roll off the stage, okay? Keep your leg bent. Keep this leg straight. It doesn't matter. So you just lower them on their side like this. And if you have an aid bag or they have a coat or something, shove it up underneath their back. That way they can't roll all the way back over. Because if they're rolled on their back and you have to leave them or you have to attend to something else, just turning your back, they could aspirate or choke on their own vomit. And you don't want that to happen. I mean, that's serious. Because then you have to go into CPR and all kinds of stuff. So just try to remember, if you're leaving them, you don't want them to choke on their own vomit, or if they're bleeding anywhere, that blood will drain out the side. So make sure their head is faced to the side. You get up and you go do your thing. All right. Thank you, Kobe. I don't know if I can pick you up. You're awful big. All right. All right. Where'd my clicker go now? Oh, it's up here. Okay. So does everybody understand that? If you have to leave somebody, make sure they're on their side so that they're not drowning in their own vomit or blood. So, all right. Here's some signs and symptoms of someone in shock. The main thing I told you before is the cool, clammy skin. They're pale or ashen. And that is a sign that will, anybody, any color, it doesn't matter if you're white, black, it doesn't matter. Your skin always has that. You'll be able to tell. It's waxy, and it's you can tell something's not right. I don't know if you've ever been talking to somebody and something's happened, and they've been in shock. They just have this waxy, weird look to them that doesn't look human. But here are some of the signs. A lot of times people be nauseous or vomit, and that happens with, for example, when I was on the fire department, I used to take my kids on all the runs. Because, I was going to college at the time, didn't have a babysitter. My kids loved it, man. It was like Rescue 911 all the time. Well, there's a bad intersection out by Leo's house, and it was notorious for being really bad. And they eventually fixed it several years ago now, but I go out there, get called for it's called a 1050 PI with entrapment. So I was like, oh, I run out there, and sure enough, a truck had hit a car or a van, and it ended up way out in the field. And so I go running down there, park the car, make sure the kids don't jump out or don't put it in drive, but run down there, and I sat beside the woman and sat there and talked to her for a few minutes. And just trying to assess her, letting her know, hey, I'm here with you. Now, I always did that. It was always a personal thing, but I always try to comfort a person. Letting them know that you're there with them helps a lot. It helps a lot with their recovery. It helps a lot with their whole outlook on everything that's happening. And I can tell you numerous stories because of it, but this is a great one because I go running up. I just jump in the car. I don't even care if it's on fire or whatever. I just jump in. And there was glass everywhere, but I just sit down beside her. The door had caved in on her leg, and I couldn't see her leg, but I just started kind of assessing her, like, are you doing okay? And she says, yes. And can you remember what happened? And so that's the thing. I tried to get her to calm down, to tell her, tell me your story. If she start telling her, then I can do other things, assess different things. So as I'm doing that, she vomits on me, and I'm like, oh, that's fine. And I acted like nothing happened, because you don't want to embarrass them, but it's going to happen. So I just I've had worse. So, and I just continued on, and she ended up being okay, and told me later on that she really appreciated me doing that, because I just sat there beside her and let her know, hey, we're going to cut into your car, and just hang on. We're gonna go through this together. And that was my main thing, is I always try to tell these people that I was going to go through this together with you. If the car was upside down, I would get inside there and hang out with them upside down and just talk to them. Because you're trapped. They're completely trapped. They got a belt on. They don't know what's going on. Hear a bunch of loud noises. But if you hang out with them, I always found that comfort in them. Now, I'm not saying put yourself in danger, because that was the first slide we went through, is scene safety. But I was a firefighter, and I was young and dumb, and I like to do stuff like that. So. Here's the treatment for shock, like I told you before. Kind of lay them down, elevate the person's feet about 12 inches. Unless there is a neck or head or back injury, try not to. I mean, we talked about that before. You're not going to want to move somebody with a head injury or anything like that. But still, you want to try to keep them warm. Do everything that you're supposed to do, but don't move their legs and things like that, because you don't know if their back is broke, things like that. It says here, do not raise a person's head, and we talked about that before. Lay a person on their side so they do not vomit or bleed from their mouth and choke on it. Here's a picture of the Boston Marathon. There was a bombing there. So this is just about mass casualties, or an MCI. Now these kits are great, and we all have little small kits, but don't be limited to what you have. Don't be like, now this kit would be great for a mass casualty incident. I mean, it would be. You'd be able to treat probably 30 people in this thing if needed. But say something like this or something like that, which is more what churches and schools have. Don't be limited to whatever's in here. I mean, these bandages are great, and I told you to use them, that you should use them if you have them, but eventually you're going to run out, You're going to run out of supplies in a mass casualty incident, so you're going to want to use whatever you have. Like that shooting that just happened in Florida. That was a mass casualty incident, and if you watch the video, they have tarps laid out. They had red tarps. I don't agree with that, because you can't really assess people with red tarps. Same thing with black gloves. If you guys get gloves for your place, do not get black gloves. And the reason why I'm against black gloves, if you go up to assess a person, and if they're unconscious, and you're having to sweep, is what it's called, check for bleeding or anything, you pull out your hands, you're not going to be able to tell if they're black, because blood, not going to be able to be seen real well on that. So use blue or white or something like that. That's kind of my thing. I always thought, well, these are great in a tactical situation, but I'm not trying to be tactical when I'm treating you. I'm just trying to treat you. So try to use lighter colored gloves, like I said. Also, if you guys can get one thing, as a medic, when I went out, I remember the first time I went out, I had all this stuff. I had a pack like this, plus all the gear that the other guys had. And I didn't have to carry ammo or stuff like that, but carrying that plus your regular pack is awful. Right. So you learned the hard way, and I tell you, because no one did. Oh, you're a private, you'll figure it out, and you did. You carried this once, and then after that, I was like, forget that. I started equipping the guys with their own IVs and line sets, and maybe a bandage that would go with that and stuff. And SAM splints. SAM splints are the best because they can be used for anything. You can use them for long bone splints. You could use it, say someone breaks their hand and you need to wrap it. It needs to go like that. That's a great thing. I've even had to use them before when I ran out of C-collars in a mass casualty incident and wrapped it around their neck. This is a shorter one, but they make them a little bit longer, and you can wrap it around as long as you're not cutting off their airway. So you'd put it here, put some tape here. It keeps their head in line. So they're great and they're real cheap. What'd you say? It's called a SAM splint, S-A-M. It says it's lightweight, reusable, and it is reusable unless it has a lot of stuff on there. But it mostly can be cleaned, and it can bend to any shape you need it. And sometimes somebody gets a crazy broken bone, and you're going to have to splint it as it is. Try to keep it midline the best you can, but sometimes you're going to have to bend that splint. And they're great. They're lightweight. And I carried those as a medic. And I carried Curlex, tape, and a pair of trauma shears, and that's all I carried after that. After that day that I carried that pack, and I was dead, my feet were hamburger, and I said, I'm never going to do that again. They're like, yep, you'll learn. So I carried my own IV and one other one, and I made all the guys carry their own stuff. I used Curlex. Curlex is the #1 thing that I used as a medic. It can be used in situations. You can stuff it in bullet holes. You can use it. You use it to wrap things. You can use it. You can shove it in somebody's mouth if you have to pull a stick out of something that they don't want, or you have to do something that they don't want. But it's being used for so many things that I thought, man, that is an awesome thing. It's just called Curlex is the brand name, but it's called a rolled bandage. And if you can get the bigger ones, they're worth their weight in gold, and I'm serious about that. And then tape. Because you can treat most things with that. Plus, you can use this as a pressure dressing. The Curlex, you just throw it on there, and then grab another Curlex and wrap on top of it. But this thing will absorb so much, it's much better than those 4x4s. Now, if you have a small cut, the 4x4s or 3x3 gauze pads, those work fine. But in a trauma situation where you have to get things done and get things done fast, these are great. My clicker. Wait, I'm going the wrong way. Good. All right. This part I set up for anybody who wants to do hands-on training. We can go over splinting. You can team up, or we can work together because we have such a small group. I'd rather go over what anybody has questions on. So if you guys have a question on a certain kind of splinting or a certain kind of blood control and bleeding technique or anything like that, I reserve this time for that. Does anybody have any questions about what we went over? I know it's a lot of stuff, and I know I'm talking really fast, but literally what we just went through is normally a 2-week thing, and I had to do it in an hour. So it's a lot of stuff, and it's coming at you pretty fast. But the main thing I wanted you to take away from this is use what you got. Don't ever use a belt on a tourniquet. A lot of people say, well, I saw it on TV. First of all, you're not going to be able to pull enough weight without causing severe tissue damage using a belt. If you have to use a belt, I'd say throw a pad underneath there so when that metal touches that skin, it doesn't rip it up. You're not going to be able to crank it down. But that thing I showed you with just using a piece of shirt and a carabiner and a key ring, that was great. That worked really well, and you're able to crank it down as tight as you need it to go without causing serious tissue damage. So, does anybody have any questions?
What's the name of that tourniquet, the black one?
What's the name of that one?
I call it the IFAC tourniquet.
IBAC.
Individual first aid tourniquet. I'm sorry.
Here.
Individual first aid tourniquet. Now, I know for, trying to be sensitive here, for people with less strength, you can get a wide band, elastic band. You can order them. They're actually cheap. What do you get them for the school? $10 a piece. They're about that wide. You can start wrapping around, and it's like it's not the tubing stuff. It's that wide, and wrap it around. You can hold your chin on it, so you can still do it by yourself, and you don't have to have this much strength because you can tighten it as you go. The reason I like this, number one, I was trained on it. An IFAC is as Josh was talking about, he didn't have to carry all this. I will tell you, when we were in situations where we couldn't get the potential of a casualty in action was longer than an hour away, we not only had these on place to mitigate it, we would plus up the standard squad medic and put 3 in there. As he talked about, if you can give them some treatment, you can extend that golden hour a little bit further, because not all dust-offs, we did operations beyond that 1 hour. And that's sensitive, because you still lost guys that way. But the IFACT is, you get it, you sit there while you're watching TV and practice it a couple times, it's simple. But the point I want to make is, if you're going to use it on someone else, a lot of times you've got to completely disconnect it, because how do I not be gross? If you've got some flap hanging out because the baler caught a leg and ripped it off, it is difficult. Are you going to grab all that stuff, twist it so you can slide it over it, or are you going to take it apart and then reconnect it with that plastic belt, the little buckle on it? Sometimes you just don't even want to touch the flap, because the cold hard facts to a lot of this stuff is there's pieces of bone sticking out of it, pieces of skin flap, and the person that had that happen to them isn't happy. I haven't met any of them who were happy.
Yeah,
They're
nerve
kinda
endings.
irritated.
Nerve endings are sticking out everywhere.
Yeah, and it's sensitive, and they're trying, and you can actually sit there on some of them, watch the nerve endings start to retract. I'm like, oh man, it looks like a worm going back.
Yes.
I'm sorry, okay. But those things, and I will send you a website to where I've got some, because I upgraded some of that. And I don't want to take any more questions you got, because this is one thing. I wish a whole lot of people would come here and realize this is something you will encounter. I'm not young anymore. I know that comes as a surprise. I go out to the shop. I'm running a table saw. I'm running the grinder. I'm doing all these sort of things, and I'm by myself because she's at school teaching, and I'm like, I don't have a first aid kit out here. This is ridiculous. I should. You should have one in your car, because you've got a calling. The fact that you're interested in this, you've got a calling to assist someone. Every person that does Kiddie Campus, KUC, there ought to be 3 or 4 of them here, because yes, we've got them in a room that I bought a first aid sticker to be put on the door. I just, out of curiosity, watch how many people walk by not even realizing that's where the first aid, the rapid response medical kit is, because they're oblivious to it. If something happens, where do you go to get that bag here? We know there's a tourniquet here. We know there's some of these things up here, but it's like, where do you go? You can't have enough of them. That's why Task Force Upland gave 20 of them out around the community. You should have them with you always. It just comes down to that. You should have a first aid kit. And you may have to invest $60 to do it, so you have one so you can take care of yourself. Because I know your RV, you're in your barn, you may be on a ladder to move some boards or something. You could be out there for 10 or 15 minutes. In this Florida shooting incident, and it's not to debate gun control, you probably already know where my position is on that. And same thing with Columbine, there's a standard thread. And it will come out, but you'll have to search for it. Of those people that passed away, some of them bled out. Shooting took 3 minutes, the whole event was 6, and then it progressed on and we watched it for hours later on. There were teachers, God bless teachers, there were teachers that say, don't move, stay right here. And then one gal, she didn't know what else to do. She threw her jean jacket over this one gal who had her kneecap blown off, and she's bleeding out in it. You can save lives by stopping them from bleeding.
Yes.
It's incumbent upon us to do that, because we know, regardless of the best intentions, EMS will not be here if it's a real emergency before you bleed out. You take a jugular, that thing just move over a little bit in that one picture, and it does. You can save someone. You can pinch off the jugular. It only takes 2 people to help do that. You can save someone whose jugular's been penetrated. But if you don't, in under a minute, you'll bled out. In under a minute. And we can do something about that. That's why this first aid stuff, I've got my CPR certification. Okay, great. But that's not going to, you got to know how to stop it from bleeding and do it with so many different sort of things. Expedient devices, you can do that. And in cases where there's active shooters, you can, 5th and 6th graders can be in a position where they can save their friend's life or even their teacher's life. And I just sit here and go, I don't know why we wouldn't think about doing that. It's that important that we know how to do first aid, and it has nothing to do with being security people or safety people. That is everyone who sits in here on a Sunday on a congregation. ought to know how to do this stuff, just in case the situation should arise. We all, huh? Oh, she's telling me to shut up. Thank you, hon.
Now, do what?
You can repeat this if you want, but I already done.
Okay.
Remember when you talked about the tourniquet with the kids in the class, you want to not have a pulse, right?
Right.
So when you put the tourniquet on, you want to check and make sure there is no pulse because you don't
Right.
want blood, and of course no blood squirting out.
Right. Yeah. Sherry was just saying, you know, when you put on a tourniquet, you always want to check to make sure there is no pulse down from the tourniquet site. And that's how you know that your tourniquet's working. Do not stop cranking on it. You're going to think, man, I'm going to cut this person's leg or arm off if I crank it one more time. And sometimes it takes that. You know, your femoral arteries are huge. They carry a lot of weight and they carry a lot of blood all over your lower extremities, and they're huge. But it is hard to get one of those things clamped off. You know, I've had to go in there barehanded and grab it and try to put on a pair of, you know, forceps to get that thing clamped off enough to get some controlled bleeding. So, you know, but that's another thing. Like he was talking about nerves. Nerves will retract, so will veins, and so will arteries. They start to come up, and if you lose it, you lose it. Yes. Hang on. All right.
What do you carry to treat burns?
Carry to treat burns?
Or, yeah.
Most things on burns, most burns are superficial. So there's full thickness and partial thickness burns. They used to go in degrees. I think that they've gone away from degrees. You used to always hear about 1st degree, 2nd degree, and 3rd degree burns. It's just partial and full thickness now. So mainly what you would do is just run it under cold water, and you want to keep it there until there is, and then treat it as a wound. So you'd put loose dressing on it. You wouldn't do it like it's bleeding out, but you'd still put a dressing on it. Some of these kits have burn pads in there, and so they'll have some kind of a Vaseline on it or some sort, and you'll throw that on there. But that's another thing you need to start thinking about, depending on if a person is burnt. That can go into a whole different thing. A person will go into shock. I can tell you from experience, I was burnt. My whole right leg has been burnt when I was 10 years old, and you go into shock. And you also, depending on, you know, you lose a lot of liquid that way. You know, you all of a sudden you're like, what? You never would think about that. But treating burns in the face is completely different, because even if a person doesn't get directly burnt by fire, but hot air can cause burns in and around your nose and mouth, and that will instantly start swelling up, because that's what your body does to protect itself. It starts swelling up. Well, then that person's airway is going. So those things are, you know, very serious. If you ever see a person get burnt in the face or hands too, you want to take off their rings, things like that. Get those things done as soon as possible. But if a person gets burnt in their face, call 911 immediately and express they were burnt in the face, because that person could possibly die. So, and hot air does burn. I was a firefighter, and I didn't have my helmet on, my hood on all the way, and a piece of my skin was out, and and we were just practicing in a room, and they were having us sit down, the new firefighters, to watch flashover, to watch it come from the next room and flash in, you know, and stuff like that. And instantly the side of my face started burning, and it left a giant blister along my chin here. So hot air does burn. Anybody have any questions? Yeah. Ice packs, yes. You can use ice packs, but do not put it directly on the burn or the sprain or strain. Yes, use an ice pack. Ice packs are great. And you don't have to buy the fancy ones. You know, if you have something cool, and you can use that. Even having a person, you know, go outside will help. I know it seems, well, really? Yeah, I mean, anything cooler than what they're at now would help. Anybody else? Yes, Rob. Okay, and say something. Well, we had this last weekend. Here, a child had a nosebleed. You used to say, hold the nose, lean back, and let the blood drip down your throat. Pretty much that's what happens. Now they've been going to take a cloth, a cool cloth, try to make it sure it's not like a tissue or something like that that will come apart, but something that you can get cold and cool, like run some water on it, shove it up underneath their top lip as far as you can, and then pull down on their lip. Not real hard. I mean, you don't want to deform the child, but or the person, but pull down with that cloth in there, and that usually the veins that control the nosebleed run up through here, and that will stop that nosebleed. That's just one trick that I learned in EMS. Yes. Yep. Anybody else? Anything that I didn't cover, feel free to ask a question about. I know that's a lot of stuff. I mean, like I said, it's just over the small stuff that I went over is 2 weeks of just that, of an EMS class. So, yes. Oh, electrical shock. That's a good one. Because if a person that's being electrically shocked, you'll be able to not really tell by sight, but you'll be able to tell by smell. That's one thing that will never leave you is the smell. And you'll be able to witness that they're not moving and stuff like this, but they're actively being burnt on the inside. So that automatically becomes, a serious trauma. And if they survive the electrical shock, then depending on it, the level of electrocution. But if they survive it, they'll have complications for the rest of their life. Usually most people do. So I've seen photos where it blew out the bottom of their feet, stuff like that because it travels, But then those become open wounds, and then they got to be treated as such, plus burns on the inside of your body that you can't see to treat. That's very serious. Anybody else? Yes.
Realizing that it takes a while for an ambulance to get to you.
It takes a while for ambulance to get to us, yeah.
Like you were saying, if you have a serious situation but you've got it under control,
Mhm.
you just take off in your car.
So if you're asking if EMS is too far out and you got a very serious situation, should you load the person up in your car and go? Sometimes that is the best way to do it. Not always. If a person has a head injury or neck or spine injury, try not to move them. If they fractured their femurs, try not to move them. Those are things. Yeah, your eyes or nose or something like that. But the best thing is for EMS to be aware of where you're at, because they're still going to want to intercept with you. So you're going to have to stay on the phone, or if you have somebody with you, have them tell you, because dispatch is going to ask you, where you at now? Where you at now? So you're going to have to give them a constant update. Or they'll say, EMS would like to meet you at Hardee's at I-69 State Road 22, for example. Can you go there? Yes, I'll meet you there. And sometimes that is the best way to do it. That's not always the case, but, there's been times where I've had to do that before too, but a lot of times people, it's the fight or flight, and they want to leave the situation, and sometimes that's not the best way to go. But yes.
I had an incident where I had a gentleman that had a heart issue, and I was taking him to Ball Memorial from about my house, okay?
Yeah.
And it started getting more severe, and so his idea, which I thought was great, was to go to the Matthews Fire Department. So, going to a place like that where they are going to be able to respond, and the guys got there. We beat them to the fire department, but it wasn't even 30 seconds. Here they were, and they took him into the fire department and then loaded him up and took him on. But that was a good place to go to where they're going to be.
Yeah, that is great. Most fire departments here have an ambulance that equip that fire station. That's not always true, and all of them have AEDs. I'd say I can't even think of one that doesn't have an AED. And that person was to go into cardiac arrest. At least you were there, and you're able to provide defibrillation if needed. Anybody else? Okay, and we can work on whatever you guys want to do from this point on.